Hi, everybody. It's Professor Leung, and this week we will be talking about the Fabaceae family, one of my favorites. So, this week we'll be talking about the fabulous Fabaceae family, which is one of my personal favorites because they have such beautiful flowers. And so, members of the Fabaceae family are often easily recognizable by their papilionaceous flowers and especially by their distinctive fruits, which are always legumes. And legumes are fruits that you may actually be really familiar with but not realize, which are plants in the pea family. But they're often dry, several seeded fruit that has developed from one flower having a single cell ovary and splits open along two seams at maturity. And they often are dehiscent and automatically kind of open as they dry and twist. The Fabaceae family, or the pea family, is the third largest plant family in the world and includes a lot of common and familiar plants you may know, like peas, lupins, clovers, vetches, and more. And for this week, we'll be covering Astragalus, Mollissimus, Lupinus caudatus, and Medicago polymorpha. So the Fabaceae family, or the pea family, is an incredibly diverse plant family that includes all kinds of life forms like shrubs, forbs, trees, and vines. And Fabaceae is also a really important food source. And again, you may be familiar with some really common Fabaceae plants like peas and beans, which you often eat, or other important livestock crops like alfalfa and clovers. And most Fabaceae plants have alternate stipulate compound leaves. And so again, if you don't remember alternate, it's when leaves are on opposite sides of the stem, but they're slightly offset from each other. And stipulate means they have little modified leaves where the leaf base, typically on a petioled leaf, meets the main stem of the plant. And then there's little modified leaves at that juncture, usually two of them paired. And they have compound leaves, which means it's multiple leaves um, within a single, I guess, there's multiple components, often considered leaflets, that make up the entire leaf. And oftentimes, they often are pinnately compound, trifoliate, or palmate. And here's a diagram in case you don't remember your leaf forms from one of the beginning lectures. So the top left here we have odd pinnate, which means there are an odd number of leaves and it ends on the top, typically. Where on the below that we have even pinnate, and here you could see there's an even number amount of leaflets on this leaf. And so again, each of these individual components are called leaflets, and the entire leaf itself is the leaf. Whereas each of these individual components, again, are called leaflets. And in this case, we have a palmate one, essentially looks a little bit more like a hand. And up here we have trifoliate, which, like the name suggests, it has three kind of branchings off that compound leaf, or three little leaflets, often really common for clover plants. And the plants also often have root nodules. Plants in the Fabaceae family have this symbiotic relationship with nitrogen-fixing bacteria called rhizobia, and that allows them to, again, take this atmospheric nitrogen gas, N2, which is highly abundant, and turn it into plant-usable nitrogen, which is not very common for all plant species and families. And here's an example of some of those nodules that you might see if you dug up a Fabaceae plant. The plants in the Fabaceae family can also sometimes be toxic or kind of low in forage quality because they have secondary compounds like tannins that may be alkaloids, which disrupt digestive processes. And sometimes they can even be cyanogenic, which means those compounds will eventually turn into cyanide after digested. So Fabaceae flowers are very distinct because they have these papilionaceous flowers, which is a Fabaceae flower type, and it's kind of based off of the term butterfly, because papillion means butterfly. And that's because if you look at the flower below me, it often might look like a butterfly itself. And so it has a banner petal. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this laser pointer, but here's the banner petal. And then it also has two wing petals and a partially fused keel petal. And so here are the two wing petals that those two kind of split off on the bottom down there. And then that keel, partially fused keel petal is kind of this one right down the center on the bottom side of that flower. And so here's another view and a cut kind of lateral view of the Fabaceae papillonoid flower type. And so here again, you see the banner up top, the wings on the side of the plants, basically kind of sometimes encompassing the keel, which is at the bottom, often of the flower, which usually holds the stamen and anthers. And here is a boat, and here I'm pointing to the keel of the boat. And so that's kind of where we get the term keel from in a flower, is kind of like that bend in keel that we see in a boat. So here's another view of a Fabaceae flower. At this time, this is Medicago polymorpha. And again, we see the standard banner petal up top, and then the wing petals often paired on the side, and then also the keel petal, partially fused, that create two petals as well. And then the calyx, which is down here, is a modified sepal of the flower. And in the case of Fabaceae plants, the calyx often is forming a whorl that encloses the petal and forms a protective layer around the flower in a bud. And then you'll also see here that Fabaceae plants typically also have what we call diadelphous stamens, which are when stamens are united partially and present in two bunches, as you can kind of see in this diagram that the arrow is pointing out from. And there's the definition of diadelphous stamens. And then here I have circled an example of what I mean with the calyx. And so circled there is the calyx of that flower, and it's a fused sepal around kind of the flower. So the first plant we're going to be talking about from the Fabaceae family this week is Woolly Loco, also known as Astragalus mollissimus, and it's a native perennial plant, and it grows as a forb, usually from 10 to 30 centimeters tall. Of course, there's exceptions, and oftentimes it grows in one to several prostrate stems from a woody taproot. And prostrate, if you don't remember from our previous plant lectures, is when a plant grows basically flat against the ground and the stems are basically pressed and growing completely flat on that ground surface. And the fruits, the inflorescence often have oblong terminal racemes. And again, a raceme is a grouping of flower clusters, and that raceme typically has 10 to 40 flowers. Oblong, if you are not familiar with that shape, is an elongated rectangle or a slightly oval-shaped rectangle. The flowers of Woolly Loco or Astragalus mollissimus uh, are often purple to pink and can vary to reddish purple and also can rarely also sometimes be yellow and white. And when dry, they turn bluish. The banner petals are moderately reflexed, which means is basically a floral structure that bends upwards or downwards or outwards at a sharp angle away from the floral development. And the flowers themselves are perfect, which means, again, they have all the reproductive parts needed to create a seed. The legumes, or the fruits, are legumes, which are often plump and oblong ellipsoid shapes, and they are also beaked, as you can kind of see in the photo above me, as well as in this photo of the seeds over here. And oftentimes the beaks curve abruptly upward. So vegetatively speaking, Astragalus mollissimus grows as a cool season plant, and the leaves are alternate and oddly pinnate. So when I'm saying the leaves are alternate, this actually refers to the entire leaf and how it's arranged on the stem of the plant. When I'm saying oddly pinnate, I'm talking about how these individual leaflets are essentially these individual leaflets are arranged on this leaf, this entire compound leaf. And these compound leaves are often ovate to oblanceate, and the margins are entire, which again, the The margins are the edges of the leaves, and entire means they're not serrated or sharp, and they're just completely smooth. In the plant themselves, the leaves are what we call silky tomentose. And so oftentimes it has a whitish color to it or silverish color, and it's very, very soft. You might want to rub it on your face. The outer stems are often prostrate, which again means they grow flat on the ground, and the inner stems often grow ascending or upwards. Historically, it's known as the famous or infamous loco weed for a lot of reasons that we're about to go over on the next slide. In terms of forage value, it's essentially worthless for both livestock and wildlife, and it's essentially unpalatable, consumed only when there's no better forage available or when animals form addictions to it, as we'll talk about soon. And oftentimes, plant animals might refuse to eat better forage when they're addicted to woolly loco. So, woolly loco, Astragalus mollissimus, typically occurs in dry prairie habitats, hillsides, road right-of-ways, stream valleys, as well as uplands, and is pretty abundant in sandy and rocky soils. In terms of livestock losses, though, it is a poisonous plant, and that's because it can cause loco disease, so to speak, and that's essentially a lysosomal storage disease that affects digestion. There's a lot of toxic principles to Astragalus mollissimus or woolly loco. It has alkaloid compounds, locoline. It has schwanninosine compounds as well, and selenia. It also accumulates selenium, all of which are cumulative and build up over time in the tissue of livestock or humans. And it's poisonous and dangerous both as fresh green plants and as dry plants. And it can also be addictive for animals or livestock, especially horses. And when animals become addicted to woolly loco, they often may even refuse to eat better forage. The compounds that cause livestock losses essentially disrupt digestion in neuron cells in woolly loco, and they actually can even cause permanent and irreversible neurological damage to these livestock or humans as well, and can also facilitate heart failure at high altitudes. So next, we're going to be talking about tail cup lupin or Lupinus caudatus. Tail cup lupin, or Lupinus caudatus, is another native perennial species, and it also grows as a forb, a little bit taller, 20 to 60 centimeters tall, and often grows erect to ascending, so essentially straight up. And the stems, it may be one stem, or there could also be several stems from a short branching caudex or a caudex. And if you're not familiar with that term, that's essentially this kind of like rootstock above ground that branches come out of as well. And then Lupinus caudatus often has a taproot as well. Vegetatively speaking, it's a cool seasons plant, also with alternate leaves, and it has palmate compound leaves instead of pinnate leaves. Actually all lupins have palmate leaves. The stems are somewhat cespitous, as you can see in the images above and that I'm on, that it's kind of growing a little bunchy. It's also strigose or has strigose hairs, so that means it's rough with short hairs or bristles. The fruit and flower are a standard papillonoid flower, and the inflorescences are also racemed, which again is you could see here in this diagram what a raceme is, but it's a cluster of flowers along a kind of axis and also has pedicels. It also is oblong. The flowers are oblong, and the inflorescence are terminal, which means that there's a flower at the very top of the stem. It often has many flowers, and the flowers can be scattered or somewhat whorled. Whorled is essentially when all the flowers, multiple flowers, come out from the same spot on that kind of inflorescence stalk, essentially making kind of like a whorled or circular pattern. The flowers, again, are papillonaceous and also perfect flowers. The calyx tube is often bilabiate, which means it has two lips and often is spurred at the spurred at the base. The corolla, corolla, if you're not familiar with that term, is the collection of all of the various flower petal types. So in this case, the corolla refers to the keel, the banner, and the wing petals. So the corollas are typically colored light to deep blue or violet, and the banner petals are often reflexed and a lighter blue or whitish color in the center with a silky feeling back. And the fruits are legumes, like most legume plants, and the fruits are also somewhat flattened. Historically, tail cup lupin has been used and extracted for compounds to help manage cardiac arrhythmias. In terms of forage, though, it's pretty poor for cattle and sheep before the legumes develop. Cattle can sometimes be attracted to legumes and also graze on them selectively, and this can also be good forage for elk and deer as well. In terms of habitat, Lupinus caudatus typically occurs in dry prairies, foothills, mesas, and stream valleys, and it's typically adapted to most soil textures. But it occurs most abundant in coarse textures and well-drained soils. In terms of livestock losses, it also has alkaloids, and often those are concentrated in the seeds, so actually concentrated in the legumes themselves, and occasionally also in young plants. They are poisonous, especially to sheep and horses, where it can often cause weakness or muscle trembling for these livestock classes, and they are often poisonous both green, meaning fresh, or dry. And poisoning seldom occurs, though, when other adequate or better forage is available for these livestock species. And so they may only kind of eat these species as a last resort, and that's when that poisoning kind of happens. The next plant we have is bird clover, or Medicago polymorpha, and it is a non-native annual plant, and it also grows as a forb and is a procumbent, which means it grows prostrate, kind of flat against the ground also, and it can sometimes be a little ascending towards the end, as you kind of see in the photo above me. The stems can be anywhere up to 50 centimeters long, kind of, again, growing prostrate away from its center taproot. The inflorescences are often rounded racemes with 2 to 8 flowers, and the flowers are also perfect and papillonaceous, and it has a yellow corolla. The fruits are also legumes, but they may not look like them because they're shaped like these little burrs that you may have probably seen before in your socks, because these are really common weeds. And so oftentimes the legume fruits for bird clovers are 2 to 5 times spiraled and coiled with spines off of those coils that make it have this kind of appearance of a double row of like hooks and points or spines that come out of that burr. It's a cool season plant, vegetatively speaking, and the leaves also are alternate and occur pinnately trifoliate, as you can see here. It kind of has that clover-like 3 leaves. And the leaves are obcordate, which means heart-shaped, tucuneate, which means wedge-shaped, and obvate essentially means it's narrower at the end, at the base than at the tip. And finally, bird clover or Medicago polymorpha historically was also used as a salad garnish, at least its young leaves or its sprouts, kind of like alfalfa sprouts might be used these days. In terms of forage, it's excellent to good for almost all livestock classes. It's also important for wildlife, and most valuable in the spring where it's most nutritious. Um, the legumes which develop in the spring, are highly nutritious and are also consumed during the dry season and important for other types of wildlife like small mammals as well as bird species. Medicago polymorpha is also somewhat resistant to heavy grazing. Typically, it occurs in valleys, plains, lower slopes of foothills, and waste grounds, and is a very, very common weed. And it thrives in rich soils, but it can also occur in poor soils where few other species occur because, again, it's a very successful and common weed. And with that, we're going to wrap it up for today, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.